A critical review of response to intervention in light of the reading proficiency crisis in America by Agyekum. My name is Agyekum. I am a former third grade teacher turned online educator, curriculum designer, and stay-at-home mom. I taught third grade for 5 years, and now I write curriculum, stay home with my kids, and teach online via the virtual classroom. I love education, and I especially love reading. As a writer and a teacher, the reading proficiency rates in America caught my attention, and I am particularly interested in this for my research project. As I began my research project, one thing that stuck out to me right away was that according to the National Assessment for Educational Progress, 2/3 of our students across grades 4, 8, and 12 are below proficient in reading. This means that high school graduates are not going into the workforce and post-secondary education proficient in reading. This data is consistent with the National Center for Educational Statistics, and it confirms the data and identifies that the United States is falling farther and farther behind other countries each year, and our scores are continuing to go down. This is having a ripple effect on students and teachers. So the problem statement for this research project is this: reading scores continue to trend downward across the grade levels, impacting learning across the content areas and post-secondary opportunities. As reading scores continue to trend downward, the consequences are far-reaching. Students are impacted across the content areas. It's difficult for students to learn any subject when they are not proficient in reading. Teacher burnout is at an all-time high, and colleges and post-secondary institutions are faced with the question to lower their standards or to provide support for non-proficient readers. Workplace literacy programs are on the rise as well, indicating that workers entering the workforce are not proficient in reading and need further literacy education. The question arises, what will the workforce of the future look like if readers are not proficient today? In light of these low levels of reading proficiency and the downward trends in reading scores, a reading proficiency crisis arises in America today. In light of this crisis, schools have placed many different systems to help students catch up in reading. In order to meet the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, past intervention models have included the pre-referral method and the discrepancy model. Both of these models require students to fail, however, before receiving help. Prevention models had not been used before the creation of Response to Intervention, or RTI. RTI meets students where they are. Agyekum, who created the sociocultural theory, coined the term zone of proximal development. This zone of proximal development is the space between what a student is currently able to do and what they may become able to do, their greatest potential. Students are placed within their zone of proximal development through this 3-tiered system. RTI has 3 tiers, Tier 1 including all of general education, receiving high-quality evidence-based instruction. When students show signs of failure, the prevention model takes place in Tier 2. Students receive intervention before they fall further behind. Tier 3 includes one-on-one instruction and special education services. So this 3-tiered model meets students inside their zone of proximal development and prevents failure before it happens. While prior research indicates many different interventions and strategies that can be placed inside the response to intervention framework, research operates under the presumption that response to intervention is best practice. So the purpose of this research is to ask the question, is response to intervention adequately addressing the reading proficiency crisis in America today? Does RTI actually work? A literature review was selected for this research because it allowed the researcher to examine a large body of evidence. Hundreds of teachers were surveyed, thousands of students were studied, and the demographics included in this study included approximately 45 to 55% male and 45 to 55% female. Approximately 45 to 95 Caucasian students across different reviews and studies, 5 to 45% African American students, and 0 to 20% Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, and mixed race students. A MacBook Pro was used and Microsoft Word was used. Search engines included Google Scholar and the Hickman Johnson Furrow Library Learning Center. An annotated bibliography was created to examine the articles and pull out themes across the literature. Literature was analyzed and synthesized using this annotated bibliography, and conclusions were drawn based on the evidence across the prior research. Preference was given to peer-reviewed modern journal articles. However, monumental research, such as that of Vygotsky, was also included. The hypothesis for this research was that RTI is indeed adequately addressing the reading proficiency crisis in America. 33 studies were read and analyzed, 13 of which answered the research question specifically. This showed the research gap in that there is not a large body of evidence analyzing the effectiveness of RTI. This research fills that gap and answers the research question. Throughout a comprehensive review of the existing literature regarding RTI and reading scores, 4 themes emerged: student outcomes, framework complexities, implementation fidelity, and alternate frameworks. According to the literature on this topic, the hypothesis was not confirmed. 84% of the articles examined in this literature review indicated RTI failure. Response to intervention is not working in real-life settings across America today. This may be due to the complexities of the framework. According to teacher interviews and surveys, there is widespread confusion and misunderstanding on how to execute this framework. It requires several different resources, staffing, time, money, and is often too complex to take place. This leads to implementation infidelity. Inconsistent application of response to intervention is leading to its failure. Several researchers across the literature indicate alternate methods. Upside-down RTI, dynamic RTI, and simpler 2-tiered systems are recommended. These systems need further research to indicate if they are an appropriate alternative to response to intervention. The studies analyzed throughout the literature review included 23% literature reviews, 61% case studies with live action evidence from students, and 15% teacher surveys and interviews with educators. An overview of the impact of RTI in the articles reviewed included 15.3% positive impact, where RTI was successful. 15.3% of the articles reviewed indicated a negative impact, where students regressed or showed signs of failure within the RTI framework. And 69.2% of the articles reviewed showed that RTI is not making a difference and students are remaining in the tier in which they were originally placed. 3 of the articles reviewed included teacher surveys and interviews. According to Smith and his article, 77% of teachers indicated that RTI was not working. In Kuntz's interview and survey with teachers, 100% of the educators indicated that RTI was failing in their school. Savitz interviewed 303 teachers, and 60% of them indicated that RTI is not working. 3 of the studies which examined student success rates inside the RTI framework included Gilbert et al., Almeida et al., and Arimata et al. Gilbert and his team indicated that 40% of the students placed inside the RTI framework showed signs of improvement. 60% did not. Alotaiba et al. Indicated that just 13% of the students inside the RTI framework benefited from it. Arimata et al., however, indicated that 100% of the students inside RTI made progress. Since Arimata et al. Was an outlier amongst the data, I took a closer look. In Arimata's study, RTI was highly controlled, teachers were highly trained, and it was executed with great fidelity. This controlled setting was great for students. However, it is not consistent among classrooms across the USA. So this is something to keep in mind in future research. Controlled settings, such as that in a case study, do not always mimic that of reality inside classrooms across the US. Based on the literature reviewed, the research question was answered in that RTI is not adequately resolving the reading proficiency crisis in America today. The hypothesis was not confirmed. RTI is not working in real-life classrooms across the US. While RTI is the perfect system on paper, where it meets students at their zone of proximal development and gives them the help needed, it was found to be too complex of a framework, and it was not executed with fidelity across teachers and students in the USA. This impacts teachers, students, and institutions. Schools and teachers need to reevaluate whether RTI is right for them. While there is minimal prior research about the actual impact and fidelity of response to intervention in classrooms across the USA in light of the reading proficiency crisis, this literature review challenges prior research. Future research should keep this in mind when they presume that RTI is working. Oftentimes, researchers analyze the effectiveness of an intervention inside the RTI framework. They should keep in mind that the RTI framework is not always the perfect system in itself. Teachers and institutions should keep this in mind as well. Alternate frameworks are available and they should be considered, and if RTI is not working, perhaps they should be used. Past research has presumed that RTI is preventative in nature. This review indicates that it is difficult to implement and the zone of proximal development is often missed and students are misplaced inside the framework, causing regression and the lack of student progress. The practical implications of this data impact students, teachers and administrators, institutions, and future researchers. Students are not best served inside the RTI framework when it is not implemented with fidelity. Teachers are faced with the question, is RTI best? Administrators need to be asking this question too and changing the way that they are implementing interventions inside the classroom if RTI is not working. Institutions may need to rethink the entire structure of their intervention across their grade levels at a higher level. And future researchers must stop presuming that RTI is best practice. They must acknowledge this research and identify that controlled case studies are not always reality in classrooms across the country. The research question, is RTI adequately addressing the reading proficiency crisis in America today, was answered based on this literature review as no. While RTI is best in theory, it does not bring forth results to support best practice in real life settings. While RTI seems to meet students in their zone of proximal development based on Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, it does not work well when implemented without fidelity. There are high levels of teacher burnout. It requires high level of staffing, time, resources. And when schools do not have the resources to execute RTI with fidelity, it fails. And therefore, students are continuing to fail and those reading scores continue to go down. The limitations found in this literature review should be kept in mind for future research. When RTI is implemented inside a controlled case study, it does not always reflect how RTI works in real classrooms across the US. Widespread presumptions that RTI is best practice should no longer be used in future research. RTI should be examined based on the situation and the effectiveness in real life settings. More research is needed to identify why RTI is failing and how it could be improved or replaced. Research across this literature review indicates several alternate frameworks. Dynamic RTI, upside down RTI, and two-tiered systems are recommended. These three suggestions need further research to identify if they are more effective than RTI. Future research should also keep in mind that controlled case studies and widespread presumptions are causing problems in the research about RTI at large. 38 sources were used in the creation of this literature review. 13 of them spoke directly to the research question, and those listed here were used in this presentation. Thank you to my peers and instructors for a good experience at the Morningside University Teacher Education Program. It's been a great experience, and I've learned a lot through this literature review and throughout my classes at Morningside.